Welcome to another episode of Control Defend, and today we're not going to do the news. I will be doing an overview of the Microsoft Entra Suite. Right, so what is the Microsoft Entra Suite? But before we get there, I think it's important to just take a step back and understand the whole Microsoft Entra capability as a whole, right? So, and it all starts with zero trust. Now, if we look at the entire suite that Microsoft Entra provides, I think it's important to understand that there are different maturity stages that one would typically adopt all of these Microsoft Entra capabilities. Starting with the establishment of your zero trust access controls, and then moving to the next step of maybe securing access to the applications and the stuff that your people access. Then on a third level from a maturity perspective is securing access to your customers and partners in terms of how they access your content. And then lastly, if you do have applications or infrastructure running outside of Microsoft Azure, AWS or Google Cloud, then the last step in this maturity is to obviously secure access in those clouds. Now, this is how the different Microsoft products stack up to these four different maturity phases or stages. First of all is the Entra ID component, and I'm sure most of you will be familiar with Microsoft Entra ID. This is the primary element that we've been using to secure our identities, right, through conditional access, MFA, those kind of things. But the next step up from that is the Microsoft Entra Suite, which is what we're going to be talking about today. And then as you move over to external ID and other things like Entra permissions management and workload ID, that you kind of move towards as you mature in this stage. But obviously, as I mentioned, today we're going to be talking about the Microsoft Entra Suite. All right, so what is the Microsoft Entra Suite? Now, again, it's not called a suite for nothing. Suite meaning there are a bundle of things that contain within this Microsoft Entra Suite thing. So what are those elements or products? They are these on the screen, right? So in today's session, I'm not going to go into too much detail, but stick around. We are going to do some demos in a later stage. But for today's session, I'm just going to take you through what these things are and what they mean for you as an organization. So starting from the left is Microsoft Private Access. Now, this is a modern solution that is intended to replace your traditional VPN, right? Ensuring secure access to your applications and your on-premise resources, right? Again, reducing complexity and costs. Second to that is the Microsoft Entra Internet Access. Now, this is where we talk about the secure web gateway, and this is where we are going to encapsulate secure traffic to internet resources that you control, right? Through identity-based controls, hence conditional access is up there, but we'll talk more about that in a second. Then we've got Microsoft Entra ID governance or identity governance. The idea behind identity governance is to essentially automate the identity and access portion in terms of who's got access to what, but not just who's got access to what, but also the automation part, right? So enabling a workflow for new joiners, movers, leavers, that kind of process, and also doing continuous access reviews and making sure that the people who's got access to certain things remain, their access remains, or their access needs to be revoked for some reason, right? Again, sticking with least privilege. And then on the right, we've got identity protection. Now, that's not new. I'm sure most of you are familiar with identity protection. The ability to also apply risk element to identities and authentications, risky users, risky sign-ins, etc. That is still a thing and very much part of the Entra Suite. And then lastly, also verified ID, which is a kind of a newcomer. Well, not new. It has been around for many years already. Well, it feels like many years. But it is there to enable the secure and privacy-conscious identity verification process. So thinking about a new onboarding employee, making sure that the one-time passcode or PIN that gets shared with the user to set up their identity, that gets done in a more secure way, because you are probably going to be sharing that, through a personal email address like a Gmail or an Outlook.com address. All right. But let's talk a bit more about the technical side of things. So this is a good representation and probably where most of the techies are going to look at this and understand a bit more. And this is the architecture that sits behind all of this. Yes, we do see the products, but it all starts with, on the left-hand side, with onboarding your users. Now, you will notice at the end of the session or in another episode, we're going to be doing some demos that's going to be targeted around 3 key scenarios for Entra Suite. The first one is obviously streamlining that onboarding process for new users. The second is governing the access for all the employees and ensuring that least privilege is taken care of as part of that process. And then the third scenario is securing access to any application resource with risk-based policies or controls. And that also includes internet-based resources like your SaaS solutions or Facebook, right? Yeah, we can put conditional access around social media sites, but we'll take a closer look in our demos on that. Now, when it comes to the 4 key benefits of Entra Suite, the first one, unifying through conditional access, right? Like I said, conditional access is not new. We should all be very familiar with conditional access. But also there's a new element that comes into play with conditional access policies, and we'll take a closer look in a second. I've already mentioned least privilege, right? How many times have I preached this to customers that least privilege is one of those key pillars of Zero Trust? So, what kind of technology do we have in place to ensure that we apply this principle to our Zero Trust approach? We'll talk about that. And obviously improving that whole user experience, not only just from an onboarding perspective, but also holistically, in the way that people access your resources, whether it is in the cloud, whether it's hosted in Azure, whether it's on-premise, doesn't really matter. But we want to improve that overall user experience in accessing those resources. And then lastly, one key benefit is reducing the on-premise footprint. So we're going to be taking a quick look at some of the things that we could potentially be doing away with once you start using Entra Suite. All right, let's start with the conditional access portion. Now, I've mentioned conditional access is not new, right? So I'm sure you have seen this diagram or something very similar. You've got your signals on the left-hand side, and you've got some conditions that needs to be met. That's the decision before the enforcement takes place, right? Whether you're granted access, maybe you're granted access under these certain conditions, or whether you are blocked access, or maybe just given restrictive access to those resources. That's not new. But if you pay close attention, you'll notice on the bottom left-hand side, compliant network is now something that's being added into the mix here. And compliant network obviously referring to those 2 components of Entra Suite, which is private access and internet access. So making sure that it only allows requests that comes from this compliant network. So think of this compliant network as almost like your own personal secure tunnel to both private applications or private resources or on-prem resources, but also internet, public-facing resources, right? A secure tunnel. That is the compliant network that we're talking about. So we can now bring that angle as a condition in conditional access. And like I've just mentioned, there are these 2 coins of the whole accessing or secure access of resources. On the left-hand side, we do have the private access. You'll see in the demonstration in our next episode where I'm going to take you through how you can actually encapsulate the requirement of multi-factor authentication for a user accessing an on-premise file share. I've never seen that done before, but hey, we can do that now. And then also on the internet side of things, right? Making sure that there is a secure web gateway, which from a technical perspective requires some configuration on premise, but also the deployment of that secure gateway client that's going to be required to sit on your company devices to make sure that it extends that secure access to your SaaS applications or internet traffic in general. Okay. Our third benefit is the ensuring that least privilege takes place, right? As I've mentioned, I've talked about this so many times, but I've never gotten the opportunity to actually encourage customers that there are technologies you can use to do this. And it all starts with what is called, or it's part of entitlement management, right, called access packages. So, that is where we define who gets access to what in this access package. The access package can either be assigned, to a user automatically through a lifecycle process, or you can make these access packages available to end users for them to go manually enable. And you can have access packages that expire, right? You're only given this access for a brief period of time, and after that it's going to expire. And this is all connected to things like your cloud HR systems or any other provider as a resource of authority for that user data that's going to be required for that access to be set up. So any change in user status, irrespective of where, would have a change to their access permissions. Remember, I talked about the mover joiner kind of type cycles. Imagine a person, that's currently working in marketing, who's got access to all the marketing resources, but now moving towards finance. Don't know why you would do that, but okay, let's assume that is what a user does. So he's moving laterally, different roles. Obviously, that's going to require him to have different access to different things. And this is where the access package or part of this entitlement management comes into play. Now, when I talk about access package, it could be a number of things. It could be something as simple as a SharePoint site, right? Access to Teams, which is SharePoint sites, really. If we talk about the content being stored. It could also be an application. It could be an on-premise application. It could be a SaaS solution. Doesn't matter. It could even be a PIM role, right? Or not a PIM role, a role-based access control role. So maybe a person needs to be a support, administrator or a security administrator. If you're talking about your highly privileged roles, we could even encapsulate those things as part of an access package, and then that gets assigned to users, like I said, either automatically or make it available to users to go and assign themselves. We can also do things like access reviews. Now, maybe some of you have played around with this, but what's fantastic about access reviews is that not only does Microsoft give you a recommendation in terms of what it thinks the user still needs access for. So, it could be looking at when was the last time the user accessed that particular resource, and based on some recommendation, we don't want that user to access it anymore because he hasn't touched it in a long time. If you do have an Entra Suite license or an Entra ID governance license, I think at least that is a minimum, you could also do other things like group affiliation, as you see here on the screen, which is basically taking a look at the person in terms of where they're working. Who's their manager, who are their peers, what kind of area of the business does this person work? For example, from all of that, we deduct a user is, it's a developer working in the IT department somewhere. Why the heck does he have access to a marketing site or document library in SharePoint? Maybe he shouldn't have access to that. So these kind of group affiliation is really cool. It means it highlights certain things. It's a recommendation, right? It doesn't mean you have to choose because of that the user no longer has access. It's more about providing that visibility so that whomever is doing the review can make an informed decision. All right, so we'll take a look at that as well. And as I've already mentioned, we can also extend that least privilege access to web traffic or our SaaS solutions. So in this example, it's obviously very clear if we go from left to right, any malicious sites or non-compliant sites, which, there are many of, we can block for all users. For social media sites, we can make sure that our market team has access to that. The rest of the team or the rest of the organization, sorry, no Facebook. Or maybe for a project team, right? We're going to allow external collaboration capabilities because they're dealing with multiple partners, though there should be different ways of addressing that type of collaboration, but humor me, we could make that available for those type of people. If you're a developer, we could make known repos and GitHub available, unknown repos, not so much, or even cross-tenant, right? Because M365 as a tenant becomes a a SaaS component as well. Well, it is a SaaS component, but we could also restrict cross-tenant collaboration using Entra Suite. And then the last kind of, no, it's not the last one, it's the third one, is the improving of the user experience, right? And that's typically done through some of the Entra ID components through an onboarding process. Remember, I spoke about a workflow, right? A new user joins, send him an email with the one-time PIN, assign a license to the user, make him part of these groups, access package, right? Assign an access package to him, blah, blah, blah. That kind of workflow. But what's really cool here is the addition of verified ID and doing something which is called face check. Remember, if a new person joins, let's say you've got a cloud-based HR system, you're going to be uploading a picture of that person, right? So an employee picture, maybe for remember those physical badges that we still have around for company access, you're going to have an image. Now, face check is going to be used to verify a person's face against that stored image. And that all gets done through verified ID's face check. So that when that person gets an email, right, in his Gmail address saying, hey, welcome to the organization. We're so glad to have you. Here's a link for you to go and set up, right? Install the Authenticator app on your device. And here's a link. And here's a temporary access code, or that temporary, that tap that we referred to. Now, if that falls into the wrong hands, that's not going to be so great, right? So if that person's personal email address is compromised, so is your ability to gain or your access capability, because anybody can then sign up. But through verified ID's face check, we can verify that at least the face matches what we've got on file. It's not necessarily facial recognition. I guess that falls in a different category, but face check is just that extra verification to ensure that is, the person that's supposed to be getting that. And from there, the user will set up his, passwordless or phishing resistant MFA if he's got FIDO2 keys or, whatever the case might be. But streamlining that onboarding process, and then also making sure that that entire thing sticks throughout that life cycle, the time the person is there, the way that they access their resources, whether they're sitting at a coffee shop trying to access a file share, which typically would require a VPN, which you no longer need, right? But stick around, we will do the demos and all of this will make sense. Then lastly, the other benefit is obviously reducing some footprint, right? So you probably have some of these things that you're currently using, right? And if you are, we could do away with them, right? I guess the firewall maybe not so much yet to an extent, but let's consider the overall footprint that you can be reducing, right? And this is fantastic because it not only allows us cost savings, but it's going to be streamlining the way that we do business, right? The ability to access any resources, being on-premise, cloud-based, hosted, doesn't matter, all through this secure gateway and all controlled from an identity perspective using conditional access and that compliant network. Right. So that's basically the overview I wanted to give today. Stick around because soon I will be sharing some demos covering those 3 scenarios. Thanks again for watching. Remember to subscribe to our channel. Take care now. Bye-bye then.